It's confirming what we already suspected. It is validating.
That's San Diego attorney Joseph Dix responding to a recently released ACLU study. It says black San Diegans were more likely to be stopped, searched, and arrested. It also finds more cases of force used against them by San Diego County Sheriff's deputies.
The attorney claims that his client was roughed up by deputies in the North County back in 2014. And on the heels of that ACLU study, the attorney and his client are speaking for the first time to our Team 10 investigator, Adam Rakusin. Adam.
Yeah, and Mikhail Miles wanted to be able to share his story. He and his family no longer live in California. He says he's too scared of the people tasked with keeping him safe. The images are startling. Bruises on Mikhail Miles' head, bite marks on his body.
I just never would have thought that it would have been me.
They're the aftermath of what Miles' attorney describes as the beating of a black man by law enforcement in a predominantly white neighborhood in northern San Diego County.
It's absurd that this useless act of violence was not only done, but that it was covered up, that it was excused, that it was explained away.
A little more than 5 years after the incident, Mikhail Miles was finally ready to share his story. We spoke to Mikhail and his dad through Skype. They now live in Virginia.
And you guys no longer live in California. Why is that?
I didn't feel safe anymore.
Mikhail says the night of September 5th, 2014, he left his house to pick his brother up from a skating rink in Temecula. When they got back to Fallbrook,
Came back, seen activity on my street.
His attorney says Mikhail pulled around the block and saw flashing lights in his rear view.
There are at least 4 police officers with their guns drawn, pointing at the vehicle.
According to an incident report, neighbors had called 911 reporting an attempted vehicle burglary, with some of the suspects driving off in a white car. Mikhail Miles, an African-American preschool teacher at Camp Pendleton, was also driving a white car that night. While speaking to deputies, neighbors identified Miles' car as it drove by, saying that's the car.
He's ordered out of the car by 4 different deputies screaming confusing commands and contradictory commands while a dog is barking.
Mikhail is suing the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and Deputy Jeremy Banks for assault, battery, and civil rights violations, among other things. His lawsuit claims Mikhail got out of the car and backed up slowly with his hands in the air until one of the deputies put cuffs on him.
At that point, Deputy Banks strikes Mikhail Miles twice in the back of the head.
The lawsuit claims Deputy Jeremy Banks also commanded the police dog to attack. Team 10 obtained deposition videos of Deputy Banks explaining that night. Banks claims he witnessed Mikhail Miles being non-compliant once he got out of his car. When asked why he delivered 2 blows to Mikhail Miles' head, Banks responded,
You struck Miles twice as opposed to once. Why?
The initial strike, he still wasn't compliant, so I delivered another strike.
And what was he not compliant with?
Putting his hands behind his back.
Here's something else revealed in court documents. There was more than one call to 911 that night from someone else in the neighborhood.
The person you have detained, what did he do?
He's been trespassing on our property and ringing our doorbell every weekend.
Turns out there was no attempted vehicle burglary. Banks says he didn't know about the other call until after everything was over.
Still waking up crying, thinking about it.
The Sheriff's Department says it's not going to comment on the case, but in court documents, the county argues deputies had reasonable suspicion to stop the car and that Mikhail Miles did not follow deputies' instructions. Riding Miles escaped Deputy Banks' grasp and walked behind him. It says fearing Miles would attack, Banks commanded the dog to bite. Dix says there's no justification for the way Mikhail was treated, and it's not the first time Banks has been aggressive. Back in 2015, Banks made national headlines after being caught on cell phone video using a taser on a teenager. Sheriff Bill Gore defended Banks, saying the boy refused to comply and bit Banks, leaving a mark on him. And in 2013, Banks was one of 4 deputies involved in the arrest of Hugo Berrigan. Berrigan led police on a chase before running into a relative's home. Berrigan later died at the scene.
There are at least 6 instances documented where he was unnecessarily and excessively violent with members of the minority community.
Team 10 asked the department if Banks has ever been disciplined for interactions with the public. They say they don't comment on personnel matters. Mikhail Miles now has a 2-year-old son. I asked him how he'll explain this incident to him.
With this being the world that we're living in, I know I am going to, but I don't even know how to broach this conversation because I wish I didn't have to.
And Miles' brother, who was also in the car that night, was not injured. Miles was cited for resisting arrest, but was never charged for that. He sued in 2015. Joe Dix tells me they're still waiting for a trial date, hoping that'll be sometime this year. Banks is still with the department, assigned to the Court Services Bureau at the Vista Courthouse. Adam Rakusin, Team 10.